Welcome to See Crime Stories, true stories of the missing and the pursuit of answers. On most mornings in Maple Ridge, Oregon, you could set your watch by Ellison Hardware. By 7 o'clock, the metal gate would rattle up on Main Street, the bell over the door would ring, and Mark Ellison would be behind the counter, greeting contractors by first name and asking about half-finished decks and leaky roofs. In a town of a few thousand, his shop was more than a business, it was part of the routine that made Maple Ridge feel safe. Mark's life looked steady from the outside. He had taken over the store from his parents, kept the same faded sign, and worked the same long hours they had. His wife Emily taught at the elementary school a few blocks away. Their daughter Sophie walked past the hardware store most days, waving at her dad through the front window. Church on Sundays, grocery runs at the only supermarket in town, weekends at the river when he could get away. Nothing about Mark's life suggested he was about to become the center of a mystery. But beneath that calm surface, the pressure was building. By the early 2000s, shipments were showing up late, margins were thin, and Mark had started to mention to friends that something about the late nights at the shop felt different. He joked about headlights that lingered a little too long outside when he was counting down the till, about the sensation that someone was watching from the far end of the parking lot as he locked the door. Even in a small town, not every stranger felt like a neighbor. We moved to a mild evening in June 2002. The sun is dropping behind the fir-covered hills, throwing a soft orange light across Maple Ridge. At the Ellison home on a quiet residential street, dinner is finished, dishes are stacked to dry, and the day feels like dozens of others they've lived. Standing on the back porch, Mark pulls out his phone and snaps a picture of the sky, streaks of pink over the river valley, and sends it to Emily with a quick line about how good the sunset looks tonight. The timestamp will later become one of the last solid points on his timeline. Sometime after that, he tells Emily he's going to run out for snacks. It's a small errand, the kind of trip no one thinks twice about. He grabs his keys and wallet, steps out to his pickup, and heads toward the convenience store on the edge of town. Security cameras fill in what happens next. On grainy footage from inside the store, we see Mark walking alone. He moves like he always does, unhurried, chatting briefly with the clerk as he picks up a couple of items. There's nothing unusual in his body language, no obvious sign of fear or agitation. He pays in cash, tucks the receipt in his pocket, and leaves. Outside, another camera catches him crossing the small parking lot toward his truck. This is the last verified image of Mark Ellison alive and well. The next morning, Maple Ridge wakes up expecting another ordinary day. Contractors pull into Main Street just before 8, backing their trailers up near Ellison Hardware. But today, something is off. The metal gate is still down. The interior is dark. The bell over the door is silent. At first, customers assume Mark is running late. 10 minutes pass. Then 20. By 8:30, phone calls begin. Emily tries his cell. It rings and goes to voicemail. His brother Joel drives past the store, sees the shuttered front, and heads straight to Mark's house. The pickup isn't in the driveway. Inside, nothing is overturned. The bed looks slept in, the coffee maker is still on the counter, and Mark's work shirt is hanging on the back of a chair. There's no note. No sign of an argument. Just absence. When more calls go unanswered, concern hardens into alarm. Joel contacts the county sheriff's office. A deputy is sent to take a missing person report, a step law enforcement doesn't take lightly with a healthy adult. But this isn't a man who disappears for a day without telling anyone. He has a business to open, a payroll to meet, a daughter expecting him at her school event that weekend. Patrol units start checking the routes Mark might have taken home from the convenience store. Gravel turnouts, logging access roads, overlooks above the river, anywhere a driver might pull off the highway. For a few hours, there is nothing. Then, late in the day, a deputy spots a familiar pickup parked on a narrow dirt spur above the water, about 20 minutes outside town. It's Mark's truck. The vehicle sits just off the rutted track, nose pointed toward the tree line, as if someone pulled in and meant to be gone only a moment. When deputies approach, they find the doors closed but unlocked. Inside on the seat, Mark's wallet, with cash and cards still inside. His old flip phone. The kind of items most people would take if they were going for a walk, or if they were getting into another vehicle. There are no obvious signs of a struggle, no broken glass, no drag marks in the dirt. Just a silent pickup on a quiet road and a driver who has vanished. By nightfall, search teams are organizing on that same spur road. Locals who know the terrain, deputies with flashlights and radios, volunteers with dogs, they all push into the woods and toward the riverbank, calling Mark's name into the dark. For Emily, for Sophie, and for the town that has always assumed they would see him behind that counter every morning, this is the moment when routine gives way to something else. The realization that whatever happened to Mark Ellison didn't end at the convenience store. By the time the sun dipped behind the trees that first day, the dirt spur above the river was no longer just a quiet pullout. It was a crime scene. Deputies from the county sheriff's office marked off the area around Mark Ellison's pickup with tape and cones, trying to preserve whatever the road still had to say. The truck sat a few yards off the rutted track, angled toward the tree line. It didn't look wrecked or abandoned in a rush. The doors were closed but unlocked. Inside, deputies found Mark's wallet on the passenger seat, his old flip phone on the console, and a couple of snack wrappers that fit what he'd bought at the convenience store the night before. Cash and cards were still in the wallet. The keys were right where you'd expect them to be. For investigators, that detail mattered. When people walk away from their lives, they usually take their money, their ID, their phone. When they head down to the river for a quick look, they usually take their keys. Here, everything was left behind. Crime scene techs photographed the truck from every angle, then turned to the ground. The spur road was hard-packed dirt and gravel, not ideal for footprints. Still, tire impressions told part of the story. One set clearly matched Mark's pickup. Laid over it was the faint pattern of at least one other vehicle, wider and with a different tread. Whether that second vehicle was there before Mark or after him, the road no longer remembered. As darkness settled in, the search began. Local volunteers, firefighters, and deputies spread out in lines from the truck down toward the riverbank, calling Mark's name into the trees. Headlamps cut through the undergrowth. Radios crackled with position checks. The river below, swollen from spring rains, was loud enough to swallow a shout. Over the next several days, the response grew. Search and rescue teams brought in trained dogs to work the hillsides. Dive units checked eddies and deeper pools along the river, looking for any sign of a vehicle that might have gone in further upstream, any clothing, any trace. Air support flew low over the valley, scanning for fresh disturbance in the brush or along the water's edge. They found nothing that tied back to Mark. No torn fabric. No discarded shoe. No clear slide mark from a truck leaving the road. Back in Maple Ridge, the investigation expanded beyond the woods. Detectives retraced Mark's last confirmed movements, starting with the convenience store. The clerk remembered him, he always did. He was just normal, the clerk would later say. Grabbed a couple things, joked about the price of gas, and left. The security footage backed that up. No one trailed him inside. No one seemed to be watching for him in the parking lot. At home, Emily walked detectives through their life. There were bills, but nothing out of control. No secret credit lines, no sudden withdrawals. Mark had no recorded diagnosis of depression, no history of disappearing to cool off. Friends and a former girlfriend all told a similar story. He was steady, rooted in the town, the last person they'd expect to simply drive away. Investigators pulled his bank and phone records. The pattern was consistent: regular deposits from Ellison Hardware, routine charges at the grocery store, gas station, and supply vendors. Then, the night he vanished, everything stopped. There were no calls or texts after his last known trip to the convenience store. No card activity beyond those snacks. The next morning, nothing. The accounts went silent. Tips trickled in as local news picked up the story. A driver thought he'd seen someone who looked like Mark at a truck stop along the interstate. Another caller claimed Mark might have been arguing with a stranger outside a bar weeks earlier. Each lead was checked. None of them held. Witnesses became less sure when shown photos. Timelines didn't match what they knew from the video and receipts. Inside the sheriff's office, the debate got sharper. One camp leaned toward an accident. Maybe Mark stepped out from the truck, slipped near the river in the dark, and was swept away where searchers hadn't been able to find him. Another group pointed back at the details that didn't fit: wallet and phone left in easy reach, keys in place, no sign of a fall, no debris downstream. To them, the truck felt staged, like the end point of a trip Mark didn't fully control. For Emily and Joel, those arguments weren't theoretical. Each theory carried a different weight. An accident meant Mark was likely gone, even if they never found him. Foul play meant someone else out there knew exactly what happened and was still walking around Maple Ridge or somewhere beyond it. In interviews, Emily kept repeating the same line: he would not leave Sophie. He would not do that. As summer wore on, the search radius widened, then slowly shrank. Volunteers had jobs to get back to. The river level dropped. New cases pulled resources in other directions. Officially, the file stayed open. Unofficially, the day-to-day work on it slowed. The bright yellow posters in town faded under the sun. People still noticed the empty spot in front of Ellison Hardware, but it became part of the landscape. By the end of that first year, the sheriff's office had to admit what no one wanted to hear: without new information, they were out of places to look. The truck, the river, the woods, the financial records, every traditional avenue had been exhausted. Mark Ellison remained missing, with no body, no confirmed crime scene, and no clear reason why his life stopped on that narrow dirt road. It would take years, and a fresh set of eyes, before anyone opened that file again and realized the story wasn't finished yet. By the time we pick the story back up, Maple Ridge has changed. Ellison Hardware no longer belongs to the Ellison family. The sign is new, the paint is fresh, and the man who opened that door every morning has been gone for years. The missing posters have come down. For most people in town, Mark Ellison's disappearance is a sad, unsolved chapter they've quietly moved past. But at Oregon State Police Headquarters, his name comes back to life in ink and paper. Detective Sergeant Sarah Mitchell is assigned to a new cold case initiative, charged with revisiting older missing person files using tools that didn't exist when those cases first went cold. One of the boxes that lands on her desk carries a familiar label: Ellison, Mark, Maple Ridge, 2002. Mitchell works the way good cold case detectives do, by going backwards. She starts with what everyone already knows: a reliable hardware store owner doesn't open his shop one morning, his truck is found on a dirt spur above the river, there's no body, no signs of a fight, no financial or phone activity after that night. The early investigative work was thorough for its time. Search grids, dive operations, interviews, bank checks. And then, nothing. Her mandate is simple: assume something was missed. Mitchell requests a fresh pull of Mark's financial records, this time reaching deeper into archived data the local sheriff's office never had easy access to. Banks now maintain more detailed historical logs, and the state's partnership with financial crime analysts lets investigators search across years with a few keystrokes. Weeks later, a report lands in her inbox. In a sea of zeros, one line stands out. 18 months after Mark vanished, his debit card is used at an ATM in a small town in Idaho. The amount is modest: cash for gas and a meal. On paper, that single transaction cracks the assumption that Mark's financial life ended on that dirt road. Mitchell needs more than numbers. She tracks down the bank's security archives, now stored on a cloud server rather than in dusty back rooms. Technicians pull footage from the night of the withdrawal. The video quality is poor, an outdoor camera facing a concrete pad lit by a single overhead fixture, but frame by frame, a figure emerges. We see a man approach the machine alone. He's wearing a cap pulled low, a jacket zipped up against the cold. His face never turns fully toward the camera, but his build, the way he shifts his weight, the shape of his shoulders, on first look, it could be Mark. On second look, it might be anyone of similar height. That's the problem with grainy video: it suggests, but it doesn't prove. The file doesn't stop there. A week after the ATM withdrawal, a call hits the bank's customer service line from a payphone a few blocks away. The recording is still on the system. The caller's voice is slightly distorted by the line, but clear enough to follow. He passes security by answering a series of personal questions tied to Mark's account, details about his first car, the cross streets near his childhood home, the name of the small credit union where he opened his first savings account. The call is short. The man asks about balances, card limits, nothing more. From a forensic standpoint, that combination, a correct PIN at the ATM, a successful walkthrough of personal security questions from a phone in the same town, is powerful. Either Mark himself was standing at that payphone, or someone who knew him very well had taken control of his financial identity. Mitchell brings Emily to the OSP office. They sit in a small interview room, a digital recorder on the table, the Idaho stills, and a recent photo of Mark laid out side by side. Emily studies the images, tracing the outline of the man's shoulders with her fingertip. When they play the call, she closes her eyes, listening for something only she would recognize, a cadence, a way of breathing between words. When it's over, she's honest. "It sounds like him," she says, "but I can't swear to it." That uncertainty is its own kind of weight. For 6 years, she's lived with the idea that Mark likely died near Maple Ridge. Now she has to consider that he might have been alive, hundreds of miles away, long after the searches ended. Inside the task force, the case shifts. The board in Mitchell's office changes from a straight line ending at the dirt road to a branching timeline stretching into Idaho. New theories compete. Did Mark run, spooked by debts or secrets no one uncovered, quietly building a life that required distance? Or was he moved under pressure, forced to travel and use his own knowledge to keep someone else's operation running? Neither scenario brings comfort. For the audience, this is where the Ellison case stops being a simple question of what happened that night and becomes something murkier. The physical evidence in Oregon still points to a man who didn't expect to leave his truck behind. The financial and audio trail in Idaho points to someone who, at least briefly, was still making choices, whether freely or not. By the end of Chapter 3, the label on the file no longer fits. This is no longer just an unexplained disappearance above a river in Oregon. It's the story of a man whose trail flickers back to life in another state, then goes dark again. To find out why, investigators will have to stop asking only where Mark went and start asking what he might have seen before he vanished. Nearly a decade after Mark Ellison's truck was winched off that dirt spur above the river, the case that once galvanized Maple Ridge now lives in boxes and backup drives. The town has repainted storefronts, the river has gone through seasons of flood and drought, and a new generation of customers walks into a hardware store that no longer bears the Ellison name. But in a digital forensics lab outside Salem, a technician powers up an aging flip phone pulled from evidence, and for the first time in years, the Ellison investigation moves forward. Detective Sergeant Sarah Mitchell has already redrawn the timeline once. The Idaho ATM withdrawal and the payphone call cracked open the assumption that Mark's story ended above the river. Now she wants to know why his path veered off course in the first place. To answer that, she goes back to the one piece of evidence that never really got a second look, Mark's phone. When he vanished in 2002, investigators downloaded call logs and contacts and found nothing unusual. But the tools they used back then barely scratched the surface. The phone's memory is imaged and shipped to a regional digital forensics unit. There, specialized software digs into the places ordinary downloads don't reach, deleted caches, abandoned app data, fragments of messages that never quite disappeared. After weeks of processing, a new report arrives on Mitchell's desk. Buried among years of routine calls and texts is a thread they've never seen before, tied to an unregistered prepaid number. The tone of those messages is very different from Mark's usual friendly back and forth. The sender references what you saw the other night and warns him that things will get complicated for your family if he doesn't meet. The location they insist on is familiar to anyone who's followed this case, a quiet stretch of road outside Maple Ridge, near where Mark's truck was found. The texts are short, edged with menace, and they stop abruptly after the night he disappears. Alongside that thread is a single photograph Mark took days earlier. It's dark, slightly blurred, shot through what looks like a chain-link fence. Under enhancement, the outlines come into focus: a warehouse bay door rolled partway up, a white pickup backed in, and two men standing close together near the tailgate. One appears to be holding something small, maybe a case or a bag. Their faces are indistinct, but the surrounding details matter. Forensic image analysts isolate the roofline, the arrangement of loading bays, the pattern of security lights. Using commercial property databases and old aerial imagery, they match the building to an industrial strip in Oregon City, outside Portland. Business records narrow it further. The unit in Mark's photo is leased to a logistics company that specializes in construction materials moving up and down the I-5 corridor. On paper, the company looks clean, licenses in order, taxes paid, no criminal cases. Off paper, it has a reputation. When Mitchell starts calling around to contractors and suppliers, she hears the same stories she's heard in other theft investigations: job sites hit overnight, trailers of tools gone, excavators that just vanish, and equipment that later turns up quietly resold through middlemen. Several of the victims had shopped at Ellison Hardware. A few remember mentioning their losses to Mark at the counter. Mitchell puts the pieces on a board: the warehouse photo, the threatening texts, the stolen equipment complaints, and Mark's habit of paying attention to his customers' problems. The working theory that emerges is straightforward and chilling. At some point, likely in the days before he disappeared, Mark saw something near that Oregon City warehouse that he wasn't meant to see: an exchange, a truck, a face he recognized from those complaints. Someone noticed him noticing. From there, the messages do the talking. The prepaid number pushes him toward a late-night meeting spot, dangling the safety of his family as leverage. Not long after, his truck is found on that remote spur. 18 months later, his card is used in Idaho and a voice sounding like his calls a bank from a payphone. Whether that voice belongs to a man running under his own power or to someone speaking under orders is a question the evidence can't answer. Mitchell presents her findings to prosecutors in a small conference room lined with case binders. She walks them through the digital trail, the recovered messages, the photo, the business links to the warehouse, the Idaho transaction, and argues that the logistics company's owner should be treated as a prime suspect in Mark's disappearance. It is a strong circumstantial package, carefully assembled. It is not, in the eyes of the law, enough. No body. No eyewitness who can place suspect and victim together. No clear image that shows the owner standing with Mark. Without those, a prosecutor knows a jury could see only shadows and guesses. For Emily and Sophie, hearing this version of events is like having an old wound reopened and labeled. The story they have told themselves for years, that Mark's truck above the river marked the end, is replaced by something more complicated. On one level, there's validation. Mark didn't simply walk away, there were real forces pushing on him. On another, there's a different kind of grief. Even with all this new information, nothing changes in court. No arrest. No trial. In interviews, Emily describes living with two movies playing at once. In one, her husband is a victim, pulled into someone else's criminal network and silenced when he got too close. In the other, he's alive for a time after Maple Ridge, making choices she can't fully see, maybe to keep her and Sophie out of harm's way. Sophie, now an adult, talks about growing up in the space between those versions, never fully able to close the book on either. And that's where this case sits today, on a board in Sarah Mitchell's office, the blurred warehouse photo pinned next to a printout of threatening texts and a map line stretching from a dirt road in Oregon to an ATM in Idaho. The file stays open, ready for a tip or confession that may never come. As viewers, you are left with the same questions the Ellisons live with every day. If Mark was targeted for what he saw, who decided his life was an acceptable cost of doing business? And if he did survive beyond that first night, how much of what followed was his choice, and how much was dictated by the people holding the leverage? Somewhere, a dusty box still carries his name. Somewhere else, a warehouse door rolls up and down for another load of equipment. If you were in Emily and Sophie's place, which version of Mark's story would you believe, and what To you, would justice look like in a case with no body, no conviction, and only fragments of a truth we can't quite prove?